I want to call this hearing to order. Good morning. I want to begin by welcoming our witnesses, Secretary Austin, General Milley. We appreciate your willingness to be in front of this committee this morning. General Milley, this will be your last appearance before this subcommittee. I want to go off script here a little bit. You are the ultimate professional. You are somebody that has been very good for me, and I think I can say this for the whole committee to work with. You're a straight shooter, and you've done a hell of a good job. And I appreciate that, and I just hope that the Senate will be able to find some common sense to be able to confirm your successor so that the department isn't forced to rely on an interim placeholder for your position because it's simply too important for that. This is an unprecedented, indefinite hold on military promotions that has frozen over 60 nominations and could affect as many as 650 by the end of the year. I will tell you, the people on this committee know what the threats are in this world, and we need to be able to assist the military in being successful, and this is not assisting the military to be successful. It is plain dangerous. We are meeting today to discuss an $842 billion budget request for next fiscal year. A few months ago, we passed the overdue budget for this fiscal year of $816 billion, which provided a $74 billion increase over FY22. I bring up FY22 because there are some who advocate for keeping all government spending at fiscal year 22 levels. In light of China's continued military aggression, that sounds plain irresponsible to me, but a majority in the other chamber proposes that. It is my hope that today you can detail for us what such a drastic funding reduction would mean to our national defense. Of course, all bets are off if we don't reach a bipartisan agreement on the debt soon. We have got to deal with the debt in a responsible and a common sense way. I am hopeful that bipartisan talks can get going in earnest and the cooler heads will prevail before we come to a default. The challenges we face are numerous. We need to solve the debt. We need to agree upon a top line for government spending. We need to agree on a top line for defense. We need to get qualified people into their jobs. The risk of a government default is real. The risk of a government shutdown is real. The risk of a long-term CR is real. None which are good, by the way. And while we're busy fighting amongst ourselves, the Chinese continue their military buildup and aggressive behavior. The Russians continue their unjust war against Ukraine. Iran is continuing its malign influence in the Middle East, and violent terrorist organizations plot to do us harm. We have got to get the budget done so that the men and women in uniform, supported by the tireless civilians at the Department of Defense, can go about their business of keeping us safe. I support the ongoing efforts of Senators Murray and Collins, and who will work with anybody to get the job done. We will get to the specifics of your budget request here shortly, but my main question is, are our troops getting what they need when they need it? Are we keeping up with our military modernization? Is industry spending taxpayer dollars wisely and delivering as promised? Because the truth is we can't afford to waste time and we can't afford to waste money. Once again, I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. Before you make your opening remarks, I would turn it over to Senator Collins for her statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Tester, for holding this hearing on the fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Department of Defense. General Milley, let me echo the Chairman's thanks and praise of you as you approach your retirement. Thank you for your more than 40 years of service to our country. I am, however, not as confident as the Chairman that this is your last appearance before our subcommittee, so don't take any hope in that statement. The administration's 2022 National Defense Strategy rightly captures the importance of deterring China. I strongly support that objective and know that you both, the Secretary and General Milley, have worked hard to develop a strategy-driven request within the top line that you were provided. I also agree with Chairman Milley's written testimony that completing appropriations bills on time is a necessary condition to credibly deter China. I would, however, suggest that it is not a sufficient condition and that the president's budget is inadequate to achieve this goal. No matter how talented, innovative, and hardworking our armed forces are, no matter how good their leadership, the military must also have a sufficient budget top line. And I have serious doubts that the administration's budget request provides all of the resources necessary to deter an aggressive China and to deal with other global threats. For example, the budget request would result in a smaller Navy, a fleet of 291 ships. This is 5 ships fewer than today's fleet of 296 ships, and further from the Chief of Naval Operations requirement, which is informed by the Indo-PACOM scenarios. Moreover, China has the largest Navy in the world and is growing to 400 ships in the next 2 years. The story's very similar for the Air Force. In the absence of a higher defense budget, this committee will have to fill in the gaps to deter China and to maintain readiness. Let me highlight a few examples of what, from my perspective, is missing from the budget request. $3.5 billion in Indo-PACOM unfunded priorities, $266 million to fund NORTHCOM unfunded priorities to detect airborne targets such as Chinese spy balloons, funding to replenish $1 billion in presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan that Congress authorized last year. The cost to fully implement with the administration's own zero trust architecture policy to protect against insider cyber threats. The cost for the deployment of 1,500 active duty troops sent to the southwest border just this week. Security assistance for Ukraine beyond September, and $1.6 billion in under-budgeted fuel costs, according to the Government Accountability Office analysis. That figure is 20% more than the budget request. I recognize that fuel cost assumptions are driven by the White House, but last year's experience is instructive. If Congress had funded the department at the level that was requested last year by the administration, our troops' housing, food, health care, fuel, and readiness would be facing an $8 billion inflation hole. That hole does not exist today because Congress insisted upon a higher and more realistic funding. One final point on Ukraine, about which I share the chairman's commitment. It is critical that the administration provide Ukraine with what it needs in time to defend and take back its sovereign territory. We expect the administration not to wait until the 11th hour if the Ukrainians need more before the end of the fiscal year. There are many issues for us to discuss today. I thank all 3 of our witnesses for their extraordinary service, and I look forward to discussing these issues with them.
Thank you, Senator Collins, for your statement. Secretary Austin, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Tester, Vice Chair Collins, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm glad to be here with you to testify in support of the President's budget request for fiscal year 2024. I'm joined, as always, by General Milley, and I remain grateful for his leadership, and I'm also glad to be joined by the Department's Comptroller and CFO, Mike McCord. This is a strategy-driven budget, and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. At $842 billion, it is a 3.2% increase over fiscal year 23 enacted, and it is 13.4% higher than fiscal year 22 enacted. And this budget will help us continue to implement our national defense strategy and the President's national security strategy. Now, I have three key priorities at the Pentagon: to defend our nation, to take care of our outstanding people, and to succeed through teamwork. The PRC is our pacing challenge, and we're driving hard to meet it. Our budget builds on our previous investments to deter aggression. And we're investing in a more resilient force posture in the Indo-Pacific and increasing the scale and scope of our exercises with our partners. And this budget includes a 40% increase over last year's request for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and it's an all-time high of $9.1 billion. That will fund a stronger force posture, better defenses for Hawaii and Guam, and deeper cooperation with our allies and partners. I look forward to being back next week before the full Senate Appropriations Committee to go into more depth on how we're working with our interagency partners to continue to outpace the PRC. Now, this budget also makes the department's largest ever investments in both R&D and procurement. We're requesting more than $61 billion to sustain air dominance. That includes funding for fighters and the extraordinary B-21 strategic bomber that I helped unveil last December. We're also seeking more than $48 billion for sea power, including new construction of 9 Battle Force ships. And we're boosting capacity at America's shipyards to build the ships that our strategy demands. We're investing a total of $1.2 billion in the submarine industrial base, and we're buying 2 Virginia-class attack submarines and 1 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine. On land, we're investing in air and missile defense and in defenses to counter unmanned aerial vehicles. We're also requesting $11 billion to deliver the right mix of long-range fires, including major investments in hypersonics. We'll also continue to modernize all 3 legs of our nuclear triad and bolster our strategic deterrence. And we've put forward the largest space budget in Pentagon history. We've requested $33.3 billion to improve our capabilities and our resilience in space. Now, let me again thank Congress for providing the department with multi-year procurement authorities and appropriations for critical munitions. In this budget, we're requesting more multi-year procurement authorities, and we're asking for more than $30 billion to further invest in the industrial base and to buy the maximum number of munitions that American industry can produce. This budget also moves us away from aging capabilities that aren't relevant to future conflicts, so we can focus on the advances that our warfighters will need. Now, our national defense strategy calls out Putin's highly aggressive Russia as an acute threat. And under President Biden's leadership, the United States has rallied the world to help Ukraine fight Russia's indefensible invasion. We've reinforced NATO's defense and deterrence on its eastern flank, and our allies and partners have provided crucial security assistance coordinated through the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that I lead. And we will support Ukraine's defense for as long as it takes. And meanwhile, the department remains vigilant against other persistent threats, including North Korea and Iran. And we will take all necessary measures to defend our troops and our interests overseas, as seen from our airstrikes in March against facilities linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. We're also investing in over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities. Now, I know that you have been following the reports of unauthorized disclosure of sensitive and classified U.S. material. I take this issue very seriously, and I've ordered a comprehensive review of the department's security programs, policies, and procedures for safeguarding classified information. I've also discussed this issue with our allies and partners around the world. I've been struck by their solidarity and their commitment to reject efforts to divide us. And we will not let anything fracture our unity. Our joint force stands ready to meet any challenge. You could see this you could see the force's readiness after Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, when we swiftly deployed elements of the 3rd Infantry Division to Poland to shore up NATO's eastern flank. We closely monitor readiness at the unit level and maintain response forces at our highest states of readiness while the rest of the force, by design, is preparing for future contingencies. So this budget will help us maintain our readiness with $146 billion in funding for operations, training, and maintenance. This budget also invests in improving our readiness and resilience in the face of climate change and other 21st century threats. And we are going to remain the strongest military in the world. And as we mark the 50th anniversary of our all-volunteer force, I am enormously proud of the brave men and women who choose to wear the cloth of our nation. We owe it to them and to their families to take the best possible care of our people. And over the past 2 years, we've made moves easier, we've cut commissary prices, we've made child care more affordable. And this budget funds other key steps to increase the quality of life of our teammates, including the largest military and civilian pay raises in decades. Now, we're also pushing hard to eliminate suicide in our ranks, including immediate steps to hire more mental health professionals and improve access to mental health care. Meanwhile, we're working toward a military that's free of sexual assault. And we worked with Congress to improve the response to sexual assault and related crimes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and those reforms will be fully implemented by the end of this year. The department is also investing in a specialized workforce to combat sexual assault, harassment, suicide, and more. Now, the department's third priority is succeeding through teamwork. Our unrivaled network of allies and partners magnifies our power and expands our security. And in recent months, our friends in the Indo-Pacific have taken major steps forward. The Philippines has agreed to nearly double the number of sites where we cooperate together. Japan committed to double its defense spending, and through the historic AUKUS partnership, we'll work with our Australian and British allies to build game-changing defense advantages that will deter aggression and boost our defense industrial capacity. In sum, this is the budget that will meet this moment, and I respectfully ask for your support. And the single most effective way that this committee can support the department and our outstanding troops is with an on-time, full-year appropriation. So I look forward to working with all of you so that we can continue to defend our democracy and support the forces of freedom in this hour of challenge. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Austin. General Milley, you have the floor.
Chairman Tester and Vice Chair Collins and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I've been privileged to defend this country for 43 years in uniform, and next month I'll start my 44th year. And hopefully, Senator Collins, this is my last posture hearing. I thank Congress for your support to our military for the last 4 decades, not just for this budget, but for 4 consecutive decades. You've given great support to our military, and I thank you all for that. We could not be the military we are today without the support of the American people and the American people's representatives. So what I ask for you today is that, once again, you approve an on-time budget. I'm honored to represent the Joint Force and their families alongside the leadership of Secretary Austin and Secretary McCord. Both been working with them both for many, many years, and their leadership has been superlative. Our Joint Force today is the most lethal and capable military in the world because of your support. The military's purpose is simple. It's to defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and there is no other purpose for our military. Fundamental to this is deterrence, more specifically, deter great power war. To do this, our #1 priority is readiness now and readiness in the future, and there is no other #1 priority. The Joint Force will accomplish this at the FY24 budget request of $842 billion. Right now, the international system is under increasing stress. Both China and Russia have the means to threaten our interests and our way of life. But war with China or Russia is neither imminent nor inevitable. The PRC remains our #1 long-term geostrategic security challenge, and it's been pointed out in our national defense strategy as the pacing challenge. The PRC has publicly stated that it intends to be the regional hegemon in Asia within the next 10 years and to exceed the United States' overall military capability by mid-century. Chinese actions are moving it on a path toward potential confrontation with its neighbors or the United States. But again, war with China is neither inevitable nor imminent. Additionally, Russia is an acute threat and remains very dangerous, especially under current conditions. Over a year ago, Russia undertook a war against Ukraine, threatening peace on the European continent and global stability for the first time since the end of World War II. We are supporting Ukraine to protect its sovereignty and supporting NATO with a force presence in every single nation on NATO's eastern flank. Iran threatens to push the Middle East yet again into instability by supporting terrorists and proxy forces, and they continue to improve their capability to produce a nuclear weapon. From the time of Iranian decision by the Supreme Leader, Iran could produce enough fissile material for a nuclear weapon in less than 2 weeks from time of decision, and it would only take several more months to produce an actual nuclear weapon. The United States policy remains the same, and the United States remains committed that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. North Korea's continued ballistic missile testing and nuclear weapons development pose also threats to our homeland and our allies and partners. But we stand with the Republic of Korea shoulder to shoulder to deter North Korean aggression as we have for 70 years. Terrorists continue to operate around the globe, threatening fear, destruction, and destabilization. In short, the United States military stands ready to protect our nation's interests and the American people. We are currently standing watch on freedom's frontier with nearly 250,000, 250,000 deployed troops around the world today. 5,000 sorties of United States Air Force and Naval and Marine aircraft and Army aircraft per day, 100 ships at sea on a given day. And we never fight alone. A key source of our strength is our large network of alliance and partnerships. And lastly, our operational readiness rates are higher now than they've been in many, many years. Currently, 60% of our active force is at the highest states of readiness and could deploy to combat in less than 30 days, well exceeding the minimum one-third standard we established many years ago. 10% of our force, 10% of the United States military, could deploy to combat in less than 96 hours. Examples of that: the President of the United States a year ago ordered the United States military to react to the unprovoked aggression by Russia. We deployed 1 corps, 2 divisions, 3 brigade combat teams out of the Army. We doubled the amount of fighter squadrons, and we doubled the amount of ships and submarines in the European theater of operations, and we did that in 35 days. That doesn't happen by accident. Another example, just a few weeks ago, the President ordered the United States military to evacuate more than 70 government personnel from Khartoum in a joint operation. And so far, the United States, along with our allies and partners, have facilitated the departure of more than 1,300 American citizens out of Sudan. That operation put Naval Special Operations Forces on the ground, delivered by Army Special Operations aircraft, with U.S. Air Force support above with fixed-wing fighter bombers, Army Rangers and a quick reaction force, United States Marine Corps in vertical lift in reserve, and 5 U.S. naval vessels off the coast, along with National Guard in Djibouti ready to go. That was a joint operation in support of 18th Airborne Corps and the AFRICOM headquarters as part of a whole-of-government effort to support the Department of State alongside many of our allies. All of that was planned, coordinated, synchronized, and executed from a cold start. Our force can rapidly project flexible, responsive power anywhere around the globe, and no adversary should ever doubt that. Your military, the United States military, is ready. However, the joint force is at an inflection point, and we must balance operations, readiness, and modernization. We must not allow ourselves to create the false trap that we can either modernize or focus only on today. We must do both. We must integrate advanced technologies, including precision long-range fires, hypersonic weapons, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all-domain sensors. The time is now. We have very little margin to wait. And the common thread critical to all of this is our people. We must continue investing in their training, their education, and their talent management. I urge Congress to support this budget's significant pay raise, health care, housing, and child care initiatives. The only thing more expensive than preparing for war is actually fighting a war. It is much cheaper to prevent war. This budget will significantly improve our military's current and future readiness in order to prevent war. We must act with a sense of urgency to deter war. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Milley. To the members of the committee, almost everybody on this committee is going to participate today, so there will be 5-minute rounds. I would ask you to keep it as close to 5 minutes as you can. I would ask the distinguished panelists to be as thorough and succinct with your answers as possible. I'm going to start talking about continuing resolutions and their ineffectiveness. No corporation in the world would restrict their cash flow for the development or production of programs at the start of a fiscal year. Yet, in the business of national security, some would say our most important business, we do just that. So, Secretary Austin, if another CR is enacted for this fiscal year 2024, what programs are you most concerned about?
Well, I certainly am concerned about all of the new starts that we won't be able to affect because of a CR. We lose time, Chairman, under CRs, and you can't, and no amount of money can buy back time. Again, you can't start new programs. I would point out that the PRC is not waiting. They will execute on their own timeline. I pointed out earlier, Chairman, that our budget is directly linked to our strategy, and of course, if we don't have a budget, we can't effectively execute that strategy. So, if we look at the investments that we're looking to make in fighter aircraft, you know, I mentioned earlier there's $61 billion in our investment in our Air Force. What we're asking for, $48 billion in our naval forces. Those kinds of things we won't be able to get after because of continuing resolution. So I think the best way that Congress can support us in our efforts to execute our strategy is an on-time appropriation.
Inflation is real and it's a concern. This is an $842 billion budget. Have you guys been able to put any sort of numbers to determine how much a CR would cost us?
Certainly, it would depend on how long that CR is in effect, Chairman. But and I defer to Mike McCord there for any concrete numbers. But this is something that we'll continue to evaluate on a daily, weekly, monthly basis if we have to go to a CR. But it will cost us money.
Okay. Mike, would you like to comment to that?
Chairman, we've built a significant funding into this budget to account for the inflation we project, including the pay raises the Secretary described, and that approaches $40 billion. A CR, by definition, doesn't give us any of that, right? It keeps our top line where it was last year, which is about a $25 billion reduction, and inflation is a significant hit there, as are things like the Columbia and all three legs of the triad.
Secretary Austin, I want you to talk about how a potential government default would impact your ongoing efforts.
Well, certainly it would impact our reputation worldwide. You know, we are known for being very dependable, paying our bills on time, and a source of stability globally. What it would mean realistically for us is that we won't, in some cases, be able to pay our troops with any degree of predictability, and that predictability is really important for us. But this would have a real impact on the pockets of our troops and our civilians.
General Milley, some would say that the department has gotten used to dealing with CRs, so they're no big deal. How do you respond to that?
Thanks, Chairman. There's several key things. First is current operations and readiness. I think you'd see it, and we've done this drill many times, run the numbers. You'd see a significant degradation in the readiness of the force. The force that I just rattled off to you that's ready today, you'd see that depreciate over time. So your numbers of rotations at the CTCs, for example, for the Army at JRTC or NTC, the number of red flags, the number of Top Gun sort of things, all of those events would start being attrited over time. You'd start seeing the number of flying hours. The 5,000 sorties I mentioned up front per day, that would be cut down by a certain percentage, depends on how long the CR went. So you'd see flying hours for both rotary wing and fixed wing helicopters going down. You'd see sailing time, those 100 ships that I said are sailing the 7 seas right now, you'd have to cut that back because of fuel costs. So there'd be significant current operations. And then for future readiness, future modernization, the Secretary mentioned the new starts. You'd also probably see some delays in some of the nuclear recapitalization. The Columbia could be at risk a little bit, I think. You could see that B-21 that was just rolled out in California not too long ago. Things like that would be stretched out long term. So it's a terrible way to do business. I'm not a businessman, but it's a terrible way to run a business. when you're doing basically budgets for 9 months at a time if you do a CR for 3 months. So it would have, I think, very, very significant negative impact on the readiness. And then, of course, there's and future readiness, but also there's the imponderable or the unmeasurable one, which is morale. It sends a terrible signal to our soldiers, our sailors, airmen, Marines around the world that when we do these CRs. So it always leaves people in a sense of uncertainty, and then it sends terrible messages to our allies and partners and our adversaries around the world. So I think it's significant.
Thank you. Senator Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's assume that we do achieve our goal of enacting the DoD appropriations bill on time. If we use the administration's estimate for fuel costs, which the Government Accountability Office says underestimates costs by 20%, General Milley, absent some relief from Congress, how would military readiness be affected in terms of the department's flying hours, steaming days, training exercises, and other activities needed to stay within the 20% shortfall?
Well, I think there's a direct correlation. If it's 20% shortfall in fuel, you're going to have 20% less flying hours because all of these aircraft, ships as well, and ground vehicles, tanks and mech infantry fighting vehicles, they're all rely on fuel. The Department of Defense is the biggest fuel consumer in the United States. So we would end up reducing the amount of operational tempo of our vehicle fleets, whether ground or air. And the specific number of hours, we've done the math. I'd have to get back to you for the record on the specific number of hours they would have. It would depend on how long and how deep the CR was, but it would have significant impact on flying hours, driving of miles per vehicle, and the sailing of the ships.
Thank you. Secretary Austin, General Milley correctly noted in his statement when he was discussing Iran that Iran would only take several more months to produce an actual nuclear weapon. And he goes on to say that the United States remains committed as a matter of policy that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. What are some of the policies that the administration is pursuing to prevent Iran from developing very quickly a nuclear weapon?
Well, from a military perspective, you know, my responsibility is to make sure that that is our policy, that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. My responsibility is to make sure that the president has options available to him to enforce that policy. And so we remain focused on making sure that those options remain available, and they are.
All right, I'll move on to a different issue. In January, the department announced that 31 Abrams tanks would be delivered to Ukraine. The latest information I have is that that will not occur until this fall. Is that accurate? Could you update us on what the current delivery schedule is and whether there's any way to accelerate the delivery of these tanks to Ukraine?
Thanks, Vice Chair. We are doing everything possible to accelerate the delivery of these tanks, and early fall is a projection. In the meantime, we've moved a number of tanks over into theater so that the Ukrainians can begin training on this capability. And when they complete that, by the time they complete that training, the tanks will be available for them to use. And we're putting in the infrastructure to be able to sustain and support this capability as well. As you know, this is a different capability, turbine engine, and a number of pretty sophisticated systems. But we're moving as fast as possible to get the capability in the hands of the Ukrainians, and I will certainly have that available by early fall.
Another threat to the United States is a terrorist attack. I think with our focus on China and Russia and Iran, North Korea, we can't lose sight of the fact that Afghanistan is once again a safe haven for many terrorist groups. General Kurilla testified before the Armed Services Committee that ISIS-K will likely be capable of conducting operations outside of Afghanistan within 6 months, and that would come with little or no warning. I know that the United States military made an effort to take most of its weapons and ammunition out of Afghanistan when our troops left, but the fact is that approximately $7 billion worth of valuable, useful military equipment provided to the Afghan security forces by the United States remains in that country. Are you concerned about the fact that the weapons that the Americans gave to the security forces could now be turned against us and our Western allies in a terrorist attack?
Vice Chair, you accurately described what we're looking at in terms of that equipment. The equipment that the United States troops were using was retrograded by General Miller and his staff when the decision was made to retrograde our troops out of Afghanistan. So we closed 11 bases, brought out thousands of tons of equipment that we were using that was equipment for our forces, and that retrograde was done very successfully. As you know, over 20 years, we did a lot to provide capability to the Afghan military, and that over time turned out to be quite a bit of equipment. Now, when that government collapsed, and when the security forces laid down their arms, then that material became available to the Taliban. So, yes, that equipment's still in Afghanistan, but again, it's equipment that we had provided to their forces, their security forces, and not the equipment that we left behind because we couldn't retrograde it. So.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Tester, Vice Chairman Collins. I'm really glad that we are continuing to hold these really important hearings and move closer to finally getting the committee back to regular order, so I appreciate it. We've made good progress, but we have to stay the course if we're going to pass our nation's funding bills in a timely manner. We know that our competitors, like the Chinese government, are doing everything they can to gain ground, so we cannot afford to let our efforts get sidetracked and our investments fall behind. Our military needs the certainty of a regular and smooth appropriations process that they can depend on. So I'm really glad to have this opportunity to hear from Secretary Austin about the resources needed to support our service members and keep our nation safe, including support for our military families like good housing and schools, mental health care, child care, and a lot more, because as I have said, our most important military asset isn't our weapons or our equipment. It is the brave and talented women and men who are willing to put their lives on the line to keep our country safe. So we owe it to them to work together across the aisle, get our job done, get our government funded without drama, and get them the support they need. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. Let me start with a really important topic. Our nation's suicide crisis is devastating, and we see serious risk among our service members. The latest report on suicide in the military shows a steady increase over the past decade, and we finally saw a small decrease in 21, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Secretary Austin, you have previously noted how the stress caused by the unpredictability of life in the military, the demand for troops to confront so many threats abroad, real challenges accessing counseling, all contribute to this problem. And I understand the department is facing challenges hiring enough specialists to provide service members with access to mental health care and counseling. Can you tell us what steps you are taking to increase hiring so service members have access to mental health care?
Thanks, Chair Murray. This is something that's very, very important to me. You've heard me talk about this a number of times. Yeah, sorry. This is something that remains very important to me. You've heard me talk about this a number of times. Mental health is health, period. and I think we have to continue to maintain that outlook towards taking care of our troops. I just had all our senior leaders, both uniformed and civilian, in for a senior leader session, and this was one topic that was prominent in that session. I'm asking you for $200 million in this budget, plus to devote to suicide prevention, which includes increasing access to mental health care. And I am really emphasizing to leadership that we need to do everything possible to make sure that we're working with, the civilian capabilities in our communities to make sure that we have access to those, to increase the capacity that's available to us. But we will remain sighted on this, and you're right. We did see an improvement in 21. We're going to work hard to see if we can continue to improve, but this remains a challenge, and access to mental health care is fundamental to this challenge.
Thank you, and we need to follow up on that. I appreciate it. Let me change the topic. As you know, the Navy is sending a nuclear-armed submarine to South Korea for the first time since the 1980s, and the USS George Washington will replace the USS Ronald Reagan in Japan, so it can head to Bremerton, Washington for maintenance. These naval assets will only become more important as the U.S. works to strengthen our partnerships and support allies throughout the Indo-Pacific. Maintaining this fleet is really paramount to our success, and the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard is really vital, as you know, to the maintenance work. PSNS is the only shipyard on the West Coast with a Nimitz and Ford-class capable dry dock, and it's responsible for the maintenance of the majority of the West Coast-based attack submarines. Those dry docks are currently vulnerable to seismic activity. Secretary Austin, I am disappointed that despite knowing about the need to address those seismic issues, it was left out of the budget request this year. How is the department ensuring this multi-year project is and will continue to be a top priority for the Navy?
Well, thanks, and thanks for your continued support on this issue. First of all, let me emphasize that the safety of our personnel and the protection of our assets it's very important to the department. When we experienced a challenge with because of the seismic activity recently, as you know, we rapidly deployed assessment teams to assess damage and also to outline steps that are necessary to get our capability back up and running. And we have a high standard for safety, and we have done that work, and we are bringing those assets back online. In this budget, Chair, I'm asking you for $2.7 billion to continue to invest in our infrastructure. That's in the SIOP program, and we will continue to invest in this in future budget requests as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Chairman and Secretary, thank you for your presence and your service. Mr. Secretary, what's your explanation? How do we solve the problem with recruitment? What's the cause for the failure for young men and women to sign up? It strikes me that it's something that needs to be defined. I know at Fort Riley we have the greatest level of retention of any military installation, but recruitment is down. So retention is there, but not recruitment. What's your story?
There are a number of challenges that have come together, Senator, to create headwinds. Foremost among those challenges is 2 years of COVID. As you well know, sir, recruiters spend a lot of time interacting with prospective recruits at schools, and so their access to schools is pretty important. If they don't have that access for 2 years, then it certainly creates a challenge for us. You add that to the fact that we've seen the lowest unemployment rate in decades, and so there are a number of things that have combined to create the challenge. It's not the first time that we've seen challenges in recruiting, as you know. And when I was in the military, I was a recruiter for a period of time, and I know that the things that you have to do to improve Number one, you have to increase contact with your prospects. You have to invest in advertising and marketing. You have to have the right quality of recruiters out engaging the public. You have to engage centers of influence like yourself and other key leaders in the community. And all of those things are, our services are working to up their activity in all of those areas. And I'm optimistic that this trough that we entered because of the effects of COVID and other things, we'll climb out of. And we're seeing some positive trends, and we'll continue to do the right things and invest in the right things to make sure that gets turned around.
Well, as you know, our capabilities of defending our country rest solely with the men and women who serve in uniform. I wish you well in those efforts in any way that I, and I'm sure my colleagues, can be of help to get folks to sign up. Please include me, please ask.
I would ask, make one strong request, and that is that we all emphasize the value of service. And whether or not you serve in the military, or whether or not you serve your community, or you serve as a member of the federal government, service is really important. But certainly hearing that from key leadership in the country, I think would help this overall effort.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you about the National Guard. We've seen how important the National Guard is, what role they play in defending our nation. The National Guard makes up 20% of the joint force, but the National Guard Vice Chief is the only Vice Chief that's a 3-star. Thoughts about if that's appropriate, or is there a plan to remedy that circumstance?
I agree with you, Senator, that the National Guard is critical to our overall department, to the Department of Defense. I can't overemphasize the capability that they bring to the force. This is something, our structure and the number of billets that we have is something that we continue to evaluate. I have all the authorities that I need. I don't need any additional authorities or help. But that's something we'll continue to look at as we go from year to year into the future. And right now, I don't see any need to affect any changes.
Well, thank you for your consideration. Finally, Secretary Austin, my time is about to expire. Congress last year, so I'll just make this point. Congress passed the PACT Act dealing with toxic exposure by our servicemen and women. We have significant challenges that of families and service members who were impacted by contaminated drinking water at Red Hill. And if the department has not established an exposure registry, I encourage you to do so, and I hope that this budget has the resources necessary to care for those service members and their families.
We have established a registry, and so thank you, Senator.
You're welcome. General Milley, thank you for your service. Appreciate you very much.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, you've served our nation well, and when the history is written of your service, it will clearly recognize that America was safer under your watch, and the troops you led had an effective and caring leader under your command. But this history may not tell the whole story, unless you write it, of your fidelity to our Constitution when there were serious questions of the peaceful transition of power, which is essential to the preservation of our democracy. Because of you, our Constitution and our Union survived, and we are stronger today. Thank you. Secretary Austin, yesterday I had a meeting in my office of several senators with a man named Karim Khan. He is the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. He recently charged Vladimir Putin with war crimes. We know what he's basing that on, the unspeakable atrocities caused by the Russian forces in Ukraine, stealing, kidnapping hundreds, if not thousands, of children, rape, beheadings, torture, mass executions, and targeting individual private citizens for his bombardment. Ukraine's prosecutor general has documented more than 77,000 war crimes and crimes against humanity. Sadly, the number continues to grow. When I met with Conrad Khan, I asked him if there was more the United States could do to help him gather the evidence and the documents necessary to prosecute Vladimir Putin for these awful war crimes. He said there was cooperation from the Department of State, the Department of Justice, but he did not include the Secretary of Defense in your department. Khan's efforts regarding war crimes are so important that Congress last year passed additional authority allowing the U.S. to share critical war crimes evidence and intelligence with the International Court of Criminal Justice. We have one president, we have one commander-in-chief, but I'm not certain that we have one policy when it comes to the war criminal Vladimir Putin. I'd like to ask you directly, why are you reluctant to share the evidence that we have gathered in the United States through the Department of Defense for those who are holding Vladimir Putin accountable for his war crimes?
Thank you, Senator. Up front, I absolutely agree with what you said in terms of the atrocities that we've witnessed throughout. It's been absolutely despicable, and we continue to see evidence of Putin deliberately targeting civilians, hospitals, and apartment buildings, and you name it. The department firmly supports the goal of holding Russia accountable for its violations in Ukraine. There are multiple ways to promote accountability, including the domestic Ukrainian efforts that you mentioned, and I believe that in a principled approach to promoting accountability. And I will always prioritize the protection of U.S. military personnel in anything that we do.
So why is your department not sharing evidence that we have gathered to help that effort? The Department of State is, the Department of Justice is. Why is the Department of Defense not doing so?
Senator, I will just tell you that it's important to us to make sure that that Russia is held accountable, and we support the goal of holding them accountable. But again, I do have concerns about reciprocity going forward, and so we will continue to look for ways to support the effort of holding Russia accountable.
Are you aware of the additional authorities we created by law that allow your department and the others of this government to cooperate with the ICC?
I am aware of the legislation, Senator.
Do you feel there is a deficiency in that legislation which holds you back from helping to prosecute Vladimir Putin?
I see no deficiencies in your legislation, no.
Then what is the explanation? There's got to be a bottom line here. Why is it when these prosecutors come and meet with us, they list the cooperating agencies of our government and specifically don't list the Department of Defense? Why?
Again, Senator, we'll do everything within our power to make sure that that we support efforts to hold Russia accountable. But again, I remain concerned about the protection of U.S. military personnel.
I've got to ask for more, General. I respect you, and I voted for you, and I'd do it again, but I've got to ask for more. Your personal feelings about whether you do it or not should be second to the law, should it not?
It is. They are, Senator.
Well, if the law says cooperate and you refuse, what conclusion am I supposed to draw?
Senator, we have not refused to abide by any law. So there could be some confusion here, but again, we support the goal of holding Russia accountable.
I have to ask you to prove it, and by doing so, and I have to ask you why the people who observe the conduct and policy of the agency think you're falling short and you're holding back. Why we would hold back evidence against this war criminal, Vladimir Putin, and the terrible things he's doing, I don't understand at all. You say you don't think the law is deficient, but you have a feeling. Mr. Secretary, give me more than that. Tell me why. You must have a compelling reason for not cooperating. What is it?
Again, I will always prioritize protection of our military personnel. That's my concern.
And you don't think the law that we've passed does that?
I didn't make a comment on the law, Senator. I think, again, the law is sufficient, obviously. It's been established by Congress. So, and we compelled to respect the law. So,
Well, I would never jeopardize our troops, and I know Senator Graham feels the same. We both worked on crafting this law so it would necessarily protect our troops. And you've drawn a personal opposite conclusion, and I think it is, frankly, hurting the efforts to hold Putin accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Senator Graham.
Rather than beating this horse, I would recommend that we probably have a meeting, Secretary Austin, if that's okay with you. Listen, I've been a judge advocate most of my adult life, and we've written this law in a way to make sure it applies to foreign nationals, Russians, involved in war crimes in Ukraine to help hold Putin accountable. Mr. Khan says we have a lot of valuable information that could accelerate his prosecution not only of Putin, but of others. Are you familiar with the Wagner Group, Mr. Secretary?
I am.
Do you think they're a terrorist organization?
I think they are a horrible terrorist organization.
Well, I'd like to prosecute them too. So what I would like to do is meet with you and your team to make sure that not only you follow the law, but you understand the benefit of this legislation to help this war effort. So, General Milley, what do all those stripes on your arm mean, on your right shoulder, right arm there, those white stripes?
Each one represents 6 months in combat.
Okay, since 9/11, how many years have you been away from your family?
7, 8, 9, probably about half the time. Before
Is that
Chief 7.
more typical than not for people in the
No, it's actually very typical. I think my peers and those probably senior NCOs at this point that have been in this thing since 9/11 have probably spent year on, year off, or half the time basically deployed to either Iraq or Afghanistan in combat.
Well, I hope you get to spend some time with the family, and thank your family for their service to our country. Let's go to Afghanistan right quick. Based on the withdrawal of Afghanistan, our withdrawal in Afghanistan, General Kurilla said that, as Senator Collins indicated, 6 months we could be attacked without warning. Is that fairly accurate statement from your point of view?
18 months ago, I actually testified and said 12, 18, 24, 36. I bounded it like that. So what Kurilla had said in his testimony, that's within the ranges that I had mentioned as well. So absolutely. I mean, look at our ability to monitor and track terrorists in Afghanistan is less than it was with boots on the ground. True. But we still have the ability to monitor.
I know, but let me just ask this right quick. Are we less safe than we were before?
I would just say that the United States military is committed to continue to monitor, track, and, if necessary, action any terrorist threat.
I would just say we're less safe. So Putin, if he wins, perceived as winning, what does that mean for the world? If he's perceived as having lost, what does that mean for the world? And is there a correlation, in your view, between success of Putin or failure of Putin and China's likelihood to invade Taiwan?
I think that the Chinese are watching the war between Russia and Ukraine very carefully. And I think for Ukraine, obviously, it's an existential threat for their very existence. But for Europe, for the United States, I think the issue is about a rules-based international order. And I think that what Putin has done is an illegal direct assault on that order. And if he's allowed to succeed in that, China will learn certain lessons. And it may not be the single decisive point, but I think it'll calculate into their decision-making process as to whether or not they attack to seize the island of Taiwan. So I think the outcome of Ukraine is critical to much broader issues than just Ukraine.
And if Putin is seen as having lost, does that make America safer?
I think it does, because I think that loss being defined as Ukraine remains a free, independent, sovereign country with its territory intact. If that is the end result of this war, then I think Putin will have failed in his attempts to take Ukraine and undermine that rules-based order. And I really think that order, which has been in existence for 8 decades now, since the end of World War II, that's critical to global stability and world peace.
Okay. Mr. McCord, in 2033, under this budget, how much will we be spending on defense in terms of GDP?
Senator, we have been in the 3 range for quite a while, and we'll probably be right around 3 at the end of the process.
Well, my information says 2.5, so check that one out, see who's right, okay? The Navy, real quickly, thinks they need 370 ships, 373, and to get there, they have to spend 5% above inflation. Do you agree this budget will not allow the Navy to get to 373 ships?
Within the FIT-up, we will not be at that number.
Yeah, because we're spending under inflation. So real quickly, Mr. Chairman, there's a bunch of scenarios. None of them are really good. The House budget, 2022 plus 1, is about a 14% cut. Is that right, Mr. McCord?
I'm sorry, the House.
Proposal of 2022 plus 1%. What would that mean to the military? How many dollars would be lost?
In this year, it would be about $100 billion below our request.
Okay.
Over 5 years, it would be about $600
Okay,
billion.
so a CR is a loss to the military, right, Secretary Austin?
That's right, Senator.
Okay. This budget puts you below inflation, so the committee's task is to reject all of this stuff and come up with a number that keeps us safe.
Thank you very much. Secretary Austin, General Milley, thank you for being here. I want to start in Hawaii. The people of Oahu have suffered tremendously with the biggest pollution event in the state of Hawaii at Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility. And the defueling and closure of Red Hill must continue to stay on schedule. I want to submit for the record a unified statement from Hawaii state leaders about the importance of pure water and the remediation of the lands impacted by the Red Hill fuel spill without objection. Secretary Austin, can you reassure the people of Hawaii that Red Hill will never be used for fuel storage or fuel operations once it is emptied?
Yes, that's when I made that decision. That was my intent, Senator, and also thank you for everything that you and the delegation have done to help us move forward.
Are you on track to send your certification to Congress that our Indo-Pacific fuel needs won't be adversely impacted by the closure?
Yes, we are on track, and this is something that we work routinely. I just met with my leadership on Red Hill here last week to check to see where we are, and yes, we are.
Thank you. As General Milley said, war with China is not inevitable. To avoid conflict, the department must use all tools available to it, new capabilities, alliances, partnerships, and facilities in the AOR. Secretary Austin, the budget includes $9.1 billion for the PDI. How are you going to ensure that these funds improve readiness and bolster deterrence without falling into the trap of fancy, expensive, gold-plated weapon systems?
Well, this is something, as you know, Senator, that we track very closely as the Indo-Pacific Command commander develops his requests. We work through each request with him, and we're investing in those things, and that will provide us the ability to further forward station our troops and capability. And so infrastructure is really, really important to us, and you'll see that reflected in the PDI.
I think it's really important that we understand how cheap partnerships are compared to these weapon systems. Obviously, we need a balance of both, but I think it's important for the Defense Appropriations Committee to make it clear to you that these partnerships are highly leveraged. I mean, I think about Pacific Pathways with the Army. This is really small money and an enormous impact. Whenever I'm in talking to Indo-PACOM or in the Asia-Pacific region, they don't talk about the weapon system. They talk about Pacific Pathways. I think EDCA is another example of a pretty highly leveraged partnership. It's not $0, but it's not nearly as expensive as the other stuff. Commanders are preoccupied with failing sewer systems, fragile electrical grids, and deteriorating barracks. Dealing with these issues have real opportunity costs and take away from our readiness. General Milley, the active Army, Navy, and Air Force have requested over $14 billion for FSRM. a $470 million increase over last year. How are services ensuring that they'll make meaningful progress on improving the most critical aging infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks, Senator, for that. Each of the services have very, very deliberate inspection programs. They have readiness calculations for all of their infrastructure. And they go through a very rigorous process to ensure that their infrastructure remains modernized and up to date, both from an operational standpoint for training, but also from for taking care of the families and the troops. So they've got very rigorous processes to do that. Each one is slightly different. But I can come back to you with the exacts for each of the services if you'd like. But I've looked at those processes, and I was Chief of Staff of the Army. They're all very rigorous in each of those services.
Please, thank you. Last question for Secretary Austin. Last year, I stressed the importance of interagency coordination in the COFA negotiations and DOD's role as a silent but very important partner in the process. Negotiations are ongoing, but I think they're going reasonably well. And the strategic importance of these relationships with the freely associated states continue to grow. Can you just talk about how important it is that the United States successfully renew the COFA agreements on time?
It's critical, Senator. These are partners that have we have a long history with. They are incredibly helpful, incredibly patriotic. As you know, a large percentage of their population serve in our military. And as you pointed out, state has the lead for this, but DOD is certainly a player, and we will continue to contribute and hopefully help move things forward in a meaningful way.
As does VA. I just wanted to quickly point out this. We are talking about relatively small money, for instance, to make sure that veterans who are residing in COFA states get the VA services that they deserve, but we need a statutory change for that. There's some resistance as if it's some big budget pressure item. It's not. But as you deal with Pacific Island leaders, I like to say, thank God for small favors. These are the kinds of things that define our relationship with these Pacific Island leaders, whether we respect them, whether we respect their citizens, whether Secretary Blinken's slogan of friends, allies, partners is real to them. And so these big investments are important, but it's the taking care of the people as though they are true partners that I think makes the difference. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. Chairman Milley, I note in your written testimony you acknowledge that this is your last set of posture hearings, so I don't know whether you're celebrating after this morning's hearing, but thank you. Thank you for your years of service and all you have provided us. Today is kind of a significant day. We're all looking at the southern border with regards to Title 42 and all the implication there. The 11th of May is also a significant day far from the south in the Arctic. Today is the day that Russia is transferring the chairship of the Arctic Council to Norway. Hopefully, all is going to be quiet and smooth and without a bump there. And the governing body in the Arctic Council, will be moving forward. But it's something that I'm paying attention to because, as both of you well know, we're paying attention to the Arctic. We appreciate the fact that all 5 services have updated their Arctic strategy. We've come a long, long way as an Arctic nation in being able to focus clearly and with intent. And so I was curious as I read through in full both of your statements this morning, and I am concerned because in neither of your statements is there acknowledgement or recognition of the Arctic. Secretary Austin, you do use the word Arctic once in connection with the issue of climate, but I think we know that it is broader than just climate, and certainly from a security perspective. You've indicated that the budget is linked to strategy. It absolutely, positively has to be. And so the question to you this morning is whether or not you think the budget that we have in front of us is sufficient to implement these Arctic strategies, given the significance of the Arctic geopolitically, given what we're seeing out of Russia, given what we've just seen in the past couple weeks with a very clear intention from Russia to be cooperating on a bilateral perspective with China with regards to the Arctic. This should send signals to us that the partnering up there is changing, that peaceful multilateral cooperation that we have seen historically is changing in a dynamic way as a consequence of what we've seen with Putin's aggressive and an awful war in Ukraine. But the question, and I guess I'll start with you, Chairman Milley, is whether or not you think that this budget is sufficient in regards to our priorities in the Arctic.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate that. I do think that because our forces are general purpose forces, and they can be applied in the Arctic or they can be applied anywhere. And I personally think the Arctic is a critical geographic region of geostrategic importance, and it's increasing in its importance over time, and that's clear. I'm attending the Arctic CHODS conference here shortly in the next couple of weeks, which I do every 6 months or so. And that has all the chiefs of defense, the military uniformed chiefs of defense of the Arctic nations, not including Russia, by the way. And we get together to discuss the security issues with Norway and Canada and the other Scandinavian countries, et cetera. So we recognize the importance of the Arctic. We, as you mentioned, all the services and all the commands have updated their programs, their strategies. In addition to that, we run a whole series of exercises, and we've increased our capabilities, the 11th Airborne Division, for example, up in Alaska. So the Arctic is clearly recognized within the Department of Defense, within the Joint Force, as having a critical geostrategic importance, and we have forces that are able to operate in the Arctic right now.
I think we recognize, though, that the training to the Arctic is perhaps a little more unique, and this is why
Totally unique.
this
Yeah,
is why the 111th is so important
yeah,
with that
that's right.
focus. Secretary Austin, in last year's NDAA, Section 603 authorized several policies that will improve the quality of life. We've been concerned about the issue of suicide, particularly up north. But we had included provisions related to special cold weather pay, as well as an opportunity for the Secretary to reimburse eligible service members for the cost of airfare travel home to their state, their home of record while they're assigned on duty location. All these designed to help offset some of the challenges that come when you are in a remote and expensive area. I had asked earlier for some updates on when these soldiers might be able to expect receiving the cold weather duty pay, as well as beginning receivements for the eligible travel, and have not gotten responses that have clarified that. So if you can help us with that.
Certainly, we'll get you a response right away in terms of where we are in the process there and complying with the directive there. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank and commend General Milley for his extraordinary service. I first had the opportunity to meet the general when he was the Assistant Division Commander of the 101st Airborne Division, along with General McConville. And since that time, and before that, you've been a remarkable soldier. Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary, you indicated to the chairman that a default on our debt would have profound repercussions in the Department of Defense. And that also tracks with the testimony of Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, before the Armed Services Committee. But there's another aspect of this, too, and that would, I think, can give China an opportunity to exploit this dramatically. Do you have any concept of the strategic competition with China if we default?
There is substantial risk to our reputation, Senator. Again, we are viewed as being a source of stability globally, and we always pay our debts. And there's just a number of things that we're working with allies and partners on that would come into question as to whether or not we'll be able to execute programs. But most important, this will affect the livelihood of our troops and our civilians. We won't be able to pay people like we should, and And I think that's something that China and everybody else can exploit.
Yeah, given the disposition of China, they would like to exploit every opportunity, and this would present them a huge opportunity to provide disinformation to American citizens, to confuse them, and also in the world community, as you point out, to suddenly and miraculously look like the stable, the adult in the room. And that would be, it's interesting, we're all talking about strategic platforms and how do we, operate vis-a-vis China. This could be one of the greatest strategic eras vis-a-vis China in history. Is that fair?
I think that's an accurate statement there, Chairman.
Thank you very much. The Chairman also brought up the issue, which is, I found profoundly disturbing, of the inability to routinely confirm general officers. And I know 7 former Secretaries of Defense wrote a letter actually deploring this as a gross politicization of the military. You yourself wrote a letter to Senator Warren. Mr. Chairman, I would like to include both these letters in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, we've talked conceptually about this issue. Can you give us an idea of the impacts that are beginning to happen and that will accelerate?
I can, Senator. Thanks. Let me make one comment on the default piece, though.
Yes, sir.
China right now describes us in their open speeches, et cetera, as a declining power. Defaulting on the debt will only reinforce that thought and embolden China and increase risk to the United States. With respect to the general officers, there's about 650 that are on various lists throughout the services that are up for nomination confirmation. And they're all going to go replace someone, and they're going to be replaced, so it's 650 really times 3. So you're looking at 1,800, maybe almost 2,000 officers. Probably all of them, I don't know for sure, but probably most of them anyway, are married. They probably have some kids. So you're probably looking at 3,000 to 4,000 lives that are directly impacted, in my view. So that'll have significant personal impact. Then from a readiness standpoint, these are flag officers, so they're in charge of very large, complex organizations. And this is unsettling for the institution, and it will have, over time, I think, a significant degradation in readiness, in capability, morale. I think the impact is pretty significant on that whole. And I understand I'm going to stay out of the whole issue of why it's being held, but I think holding up commissioned officers' confirmations on anything other than their own personal talent and skills further politicizes the military. And if the intent is to not politicize the military, I think it has the opposite effect. It drags the uniformed military right in the middle of a political argument.
I think you're exactly right, and that's why we'll do our best to reverse this. Again, I think the cumulative effect is very, very dangerous to both readiness and certainly to the families of these officers. A final point, I'm running out of time, but we talk a lot about the number of platforms we're going to have and et cetera. My recollection, but I'd have to be checked by the historians, is that the French army had many more tanks than the Wehrmacht in 1940. But what they didn't have is the combined arms teams, the communications, et cetera. And one of the areas we're trying to do is to get JADC2 in place so that we can communicate, which will multiply our power so that, X number of platforms could be more effective, even if our opponents have a lot more platforms. It's just, is that accurate or a fair comment?
It is, Senator. JADC2 is a critical component of the modernization of the joint warfighting concept. It is the command and control system that brings it all together in a combined arms way. It involves software, hardware, procedures, et cetera. It's a key piece of the way the United States military intends to operate in a future operating environment. And without it, you won't be able to execute combined arms operations. So JADC2 is critical.
And it'll multiply the number of platforms we have effectively.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Austin, General Milley, Deputy Secretary McCord, thank you all for being here. And General Milley, let me echo all of the thanks from other members of the subcommittee for your long service to this country. I would like to follow up on Senator Reid's comments, and I'm disappointed that more of the members of the subcommittee aren't here, because I'm not sure that everyone understands what the impact of holding these general officer nominations are on the military. And I think Senator Reid and I are the only ones on this subcommittee on armed services who have had a chance to see this play out. And while you may not want to get into the reason why these officers are being held up, I'm going to ask you, Secretary Austin, to explain the policy that you put in place that is the reason why our colleague from Alabama says he is holding these nominees.
You're speaking of our policy on reproductive health care.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Senator. As you well know, Senator, about 18% of our force is female.
That's right. And can you speak to how important it is to be able to recruit those women into the military, especially given that recruitment is down right now?
I think it's critical that people be assured that if they join the force, they will continue to have access to reproductive health care. And currently, we have about 80,000 of our women that are stationed in those areas where they don't have ready access to reproductive health care. And they don't get a chance to pick where they live and where they're stationed. And so, you know, what this policy does is ensure that that access exists, that they have the means to access reproductive health care, and especially those things, non-covered reproductive health care. And again, this policy is firmly rooted in law. Again, we've talked about the fact that the DOJ has provided an opinion. That opinion is posted on their website, and so this is important for our force. And again, we have a young force, and about 1 in 5 of our troops are women. And I think it's critical that they be assured that they'll have access. I want them focused on the mission and not worried about whether or not they're going to have access to reproductive health care.
And I would just add that we know that women serving in the military have a higher rate of unintended pregnancies than the general population in this country. So that's another reason why this is so important. But can you also address whether we would be making our recruitment numbers that we need to make for the military if we were not able to recruit women?
Well, certainly that problem would be compounded by an order of magnitude. Again, our women do incredible work for us, Senator, and we are all very proud of them, and they continue to amaze us each and every day. And we would not be the force that we are without the contribution that they bring to the table. And again, it's throughout DOD. I'll make that comment.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate, as I do so many people, the policy that you've put in place, and I think it's absolutely critical. And I hope that we are going to see this body address those holes that are being placed on our general officers. I talked to one of them yesterday who's waiting to be sent out to another posting, and he doesn't have his new title. He's basically in a holding pattern while he waits for that.
It would be tragic if that kind of talent began to vote with their feet and because of the unpredictability, leave our service and go do something else. These people have earned the right to be promoted, and their families deserve what comes with that as well. And so we certainly don't want to begin losing people because we can't promote them. So.
Absolutely. Mr. Secretary, you were asked, I think, by Senator Moran about the registry for those people at Red Hill, and you said that that is, in fact, in place, which I appreciate. I think that's important. But DOD has not sought to set up a registry for military members who have been exposed to PFAS. Can you speak to why that is?
You're right. We have not done that, and certainly PFAS is a national challenge, but and DoD continues to do everything that we can to help address this issue. We recognize the importance of it, and so we'll take a look at whether or not we can and should do that. We've increased our testing across the board, and so I'll have our staff provide some recommendations to me, and we'll come back to you and discuss this with you.
I appreciate that. I've introduced an amendment in the last 3 NDAAs to try and set up a registry. We have a health study that the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry is about to complete at 8 sites around this country with the health impacts of PFAS that'll give us that real health data on which to base the impact of PFAS. But it's clearly, we know it's, or we're pretty sure it's a carcinogen, and so I hope that you will, in fact, take this seriously, and I stand ready to be helpful in any way that I can. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and for your service. As the new member of this subcommittee, General Milley, I have not had the pleasure to work with you through the appropriations process, but I am deeply grateful for your service and your willingness to continue to work with this committee. I wanted to speak with you for a moment about information warfare. Our national defense strategy today has a robust information component. Today, the amount of money that Russia and China are spending on propaganda, unfortunately, dwarfs the amount that we are allocating to fight misinformation. Obviously, this has to be a component of your strategy, but you're partnered often with the State Department. There are certain things you can do that the State Department cannot. For instance, the Global Engagement Center at the State Department funds not-for-profits and fact-checkers on China and Russia's periphery that are trying to set the record straight. So I wanted just to ask you about why that partnership is important. I think we have to have a whole-of-government approach to fighting misinformation. That involves making sure that your commanders have the ability to be nimble in fighting back against narratives that are endangering our nation's security and endangering their security, but also it means making sure that the State Department has resources to do the same.
So thanks, Senator, for the opportunity to comment. Information has always been critical to the conduct of war throughout history, and it's probably never more important than it is today. We're in the information age. We've got a wide variety of information tools. We've got the explosion of social media. You've got all kinds of tools that are literally you can walk around with, iPhones, for example. And these are very, very powerful tools. Now we're in the age of artificial intelligence, algorithms. You've got the ability to do deep fake stories out there with people or other things. So this is an area in which we need to get better, and we need to get more coordinated. Information oftentimes can be a decisive factor in the conduct of war. We've got a lot of really good programs inside the military, and we know that we work well with intelligence agencies, for example, and the State Department. But this effort needs to be more coordinated and I think advanced to a greater level, given the capabilities of not only Russia but China. They have very significant information capabilities in cyber, very significant electronic warfare capabilities, and very significant disinformation capabilities. And they're active every single day. So this is an area of real importance, and we need to improve ourselves.
Well, thank you for challenging this committee to step up on that effort. General Secretary Austin, there's reports that the Pentagon has sought a high-level meeting with your counterparts in China, and obviously we have been missing high-level dialogue with the Chinese since the flying of the Chinese balloon over U.S. airspace. There's no excuse for the provocative actions of the Chinese government. But at the same time, it's not good when we're not talking to each other at a high level. And so my question is this. My belief is that there's no choice to be made between having an effective China policy to try to make sure that their power does not expand in a way that hurts the United States, and continuing a dialogue about the things where we can work together and the ways in which we address our challenges. Can you just talk about the state of the mill-to-mill dialogue with China and your views on whether it's important to keep those channels open?
I think it's critical, Senator. Thanks for bringing this topic up. I have reached out to my counterpart on a number of occasions, and I have conducted face-to-face meetings with the former Minister of Defense. There's a new Minister of Defense in the seat now. I've reached out to him. I sent him a letter and offered to talk as well. I'll continue to do that. I think that's critical. You know, when you have two countries with this kind of capability and we're operating globally, I think we have to have the ability to manage potential crises and really there are things that we will have to address from time to time, and we really need to be able to pick up the phone and talk directly to senior people. So I'll continue to work this. I think it's really important. We'll probably have another opportunity as we go out to Singapore for a conference in Singapore, and if the opportunity presents itself, I'll look to engage my counterpart. I think that we need to open that door and continue to engage each other.
Well, I appreciate your public statements to that effect and the outreach that you're doing. Agree that these are not mutually exclusive goals, to keep that dialogue open, to avoid conflict, but also to make sure that we are plussing up resources both at DOD and at state to make sure that we are ready. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that. I was just with Senator Murray at another meeting, so I've got my chairmans mixed up. I just want to say I agree with the point that Senator Murphy was trying to make. The communication really is really important. We've seen that, in other areas when we've had situations like our situation with China, and I know that you're working really hard to do that. Congratulations to all of you for your great careers. We're going to miss you, General Milley. Who would have thought that the young hockey player would have all of those stars and to have such a tremendous career? So, again, congratulations. Secretary Austin, you mentioned in your testimony that our cooperation with our allies and partners is central to co-developing advanced capabilities for our warfighters. Recently, the record of decision was signed by Secretary Kendall that will make Ebbing Airfield in Fort Smith, Arkansas, the future home for F-35 U.S. Allied pilot training. I continue to work with the Air Force to make Ebbing a premier pilot training center and ensure it is ready on time to train our allied partner pilots. Secretary Austin, can you briefly speak to how important this mission in Arkansas is to our national security?
It's critical as our allies and partners invest in the kinds of capability that we have. F-35s are a great example. We need to make sure that we're working together to increase interoperability, and we do that, by not only making sure that we have the policies and procedures in the right place, but this frequent contact, this working together with each other is, you can't replace it. It also builds trust. We know that when you need trust, you can't surge it. It has to be there. It's something you got to work on each and every day, and so the capability that you're speaking of in Arkansas, I think, is critical. And I know that we have some allies and partners that are really looking forward to using that capability. So thanks for what you're doing to broaden our capacity here.
Good, thank you. In regard to the foreign military sales, there's all kinds of benefits. We've seen that in stimulating the economy in our country, and again, just in providing the protection that we desperately need. Unfortunately, this system is overburdened with regulation and bureaucratic log jams. And according to Mr. Eric Fanning's recent testimony in the Armed Services Committee, it's resulted in an average delay of over 18 months to get on contract. This leaves our allies vulnerable and turning to other countries to buy military capabilities. Secretary Austin, how does FMS contribute to the Department's strategy of deterrence, and what specific processes contribute to the unacceptable delay for getting capabilities on contract?
Well, certainly, FMS helps us to magnify our capability, because if our allies and partners are working with the same kinds of equipment and are skilled on that in using that equipment, then it's really helpful in terms of expanding our footprint, our capability. In terms of the kinds of things that contribute to lags, there are a number of things that come together. One, industry owns a piece of that, and we would hope that, as the contracts are enacted, that they're able to meet the timelines, and so coming out of a COVID period of 2 years of COVID, that's had an impact on a number of things. But there are also, to your point, bureaucratic issues that often get in the way. Now, what I did early on 2 years ago, was I put together a group of our senior people to really focus on the FMS process, and to identify those bureaucratic issues and roadblocks that we could knock down, and so that body continues its work, and it's hard work, but we're going to do everything possible on our end to make sure that bureaucratic issues in the Pentagon are not solely holding things up. But again, there are a number of things that come together to make this process more complicated than it should be.
Right. I know sometimes we make that more difficult. So if there's, I think I can speak for the committee. If there's anything we can do legislatively, or be sure and let us know. That's so very important. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. And I'm going to dovetail onto what you just said. I can tell you what Congress can do can make things easier. Not default on our debt like the House of Representatives wants us to do. Get a budget done on time so these guys don't have to deal with the uncertainty of a CR. Take the holds off the military promotions, because quite frankly, it's flat stupid and politicizing our military. That's what we can do. And I know, Senator Bozeman, you're a good man, and I don't think you'd disagree with me. So thank you. But the truth is this: Congress needs to step up and do their job. If we want to hold you guys accountable, if we want to hold the contractors that supply us with our military equipment accountable, we need to do our job. And part of that job is making sure that we give a budget that makes sure that keep this country safe. And the other part of it is just not do stupid things like CRs and defaults and holding military promotions. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you do every single day to keep this country safe, to lead some of the finest people on earth in our military. We appreciate your testimony here today. Senators may ask additional questions. I would ask that you get back to them as quickly as you possibly can with a response. But thank you for what you do. General Milley, your record speaks for itself. Thank you very much. This Defense Committee will reconvene on Tuesday, May 16th at 10 a.m. in a classified session to hear from the Director of Military Defense Agency and the Commander of U.S. Northern Command on the budget request for hypersonic threats, missile defense, and the protection of the U.S. homeland. With that, we stand in recess.